Hi, I'm Dan from Eightfold Property, and in this video we're going to talk at length about the student trends for HMOs for 2020. Speaking as an agent who's been working in HMOs for 15 years now, last year was by far the hardest and most taxing, but also the most interesting year to date. And basically what happened was, in a really buoyant market, landlords have been working with the council to create 5 and 6 bedroom student houses. This has worked wonderfully for our influx of students. The university's been expanding, the landlords have seen the rents increase, and they've been able to fit 1 or 2 more people in each house, therefore making the return on each of these investments much better. So by using dormers and extensions to make sure that you can fit more people in these student houses, it's allowed us to get a better return on these student houses for the investments and the landlords. But like all markets, it's going to hit a dip. So what we saw last year was we saw that an eventual overdevelopment of the student market, which basically means that anybody who was anybody was cashing in all other investments and turning them into student HMOs. It was just given a much better return, it was a lucrative market, and it didn't really seem to see any trends that were going to be dipping off. However, what happened last year was we saw a low intake of student numbers, which basically means that less people were applying to go to university. Less people applying means less people need housing. So towards the end of the last student year, we saw a little bit of a panic. People started to lower their rents. Houses were going out and they were trying to go multiple agency, which was just smacking of desperation as far as I can see. And none of this really helped. And ultimately, what this left us with was an oversupply of student housing. So we need to look at last year's issues and see how we can turn that into a positive for the coming year. So in major cities where you've got big educational institutions like Swansea, where there's been a real big production line for purpose-built student accommodation, which is where big investors and big companies will come in and they'll build these high-rise blocks and all the students are funneled there. The original model where people were building HMOs or taking 3 and 4 bedroom houses and turning them into 5 and 6 bedroom student houses, that model completely disappeared. So the universities who are investing in this housing, their game plan is going to be they want to funnel their students towards their own accommodation, which is where they're going to monetize it, because they're sinking millions and millions into these developments. If they don't monetize it, it's absolutely for no reason. So you can walk down some of these streets in towns like Swansea and you'll see roads that used to be student house, student house, student house. They're now all empty. They've got hundreds of to-let boards. They can't sell them, they can't rent them, which is tricky for us as agents. However, just because there's been a change in the market doesn't mean that it's dead. It just means that you've got to be a lot more thoughtful and a lot more strategic when it comes to what you're going to buy and how much you're going to sink into it. So I can speak quite in detail about the Brighton market because this is where we operate. So in Brighton, if you're going to buy a HMO, you've got to be really wary of Article 4. Now, Article 4 was a directive that came from central government and can be interpreted by local councils in various different ways. But effectively what it's trying to do is limit the amount of HMOs in any one area. This is mainly because as studentification became a thing, the local residents were starting to kick off because it was changing the demographic of any one area. For instance, if you had 20 houses in any one road and all of a sudden 18 of those are students, you're going to have less families, which means less children, which means that, for instance, the primary schools aren't going to have the intake that they need so they can keep going. Primary schools go, more developments happen in that area. So it's rather than an organic change, it's a forced change. So in layman's terms, Article 4 gives the council the right to suspend permitted development rights, which means that if they did want to trade a house as a HMO, they would then have to go and get planning permission to do this. You can still get your HMO license. They can't deny you that, providing you hit the legislation targets, which will be room sizes or kitchen space per person. But you can spend all your money doing that and then the council can come in with planning and say, we're not going to allow you to trade that as a HMO, which means that you've sunk your money into something that's not going to work for you. So I've seen a few landlords who've gone with buyer's agents and people who can profess to try and find you a really good investment. You really have to make sure they know what they're doing, because I have seen landlords be misadvised, and further down the line we're getting enforcement notices against houses that we've actually been trading as HMOs, really good HMOs, for a good few years, And if they haven't hit the exact criteria at the right time, then retrospectively the council are going in and they're tearing them apart. What can you do if this happens to you? Okay, so you can't really do an awful lot. You can just go back out and rent it to a family. That's pretty much the only option you're going to have, which is okay if you're mortgage free, but if you've got a 75% loan to value, you're going to really struggle to take a lesser rent from this. That topped with having to pay 3% extra stamp duty, the building cost down south being up to, I think it's about 10% more than it is up north. Agency fees are going up for management fees for the landlords because of the agency fee ban. You know, landlords are being hit all different ways. The last thing you want is to be buying a HMO that can't be traded as a HMO. Okay, so let's talk about the actual HMOs now. So if you've chosen your site and you're pretty confident that you're going to get change of use, or it might already be a HMO that's not in a great condition at the moment that you're just going to buy and improve. Things that you've got to think are what are trending at the moment. So if you look at the purpose-built student accommodation, it's all built with mental health as the focal point. For instance, they're really focusing on communal areas. Some of these places where they've got 8 and 10 bedrooms, they have a whole floor that's dedicated to communal area with you know, TVs, music centres. They try and arrange social events in these areas. And what it's supposed to be doing is making sure that people are getting support. It's trying to create a sense of community rather than having, let's say, a 6-bedroom student house that doesn't even have a lounge. It will just have a kitchen, diner. So you want to make sure that in every bedroom, every alcove has got shelves in. If you've got a door, you can put a shelf above the door. You can make sure that beds are not divan beds. They are wooden or metal framed beds that you can have space underneath. That desks are built into bay windows so that you can use every inch of them, that you can have USB plug sockets turning 2 sockets into 4 sockets. Making sure that the colours are vibrant and bright. We don't think you need to go as far as putting motivational quotes all over the walls, but you know, some nice colours, taking advantage of all of the light that you can get in any house. That's really going to help you moving forwards. You can use reclaimed wood. This is a real big thing moving forwards. Instead of trying to use all the best, highest quality wood, just use some reclaimed wood. That's perfectly good for shelves. Scaffold poles, you know, they keep air circulating rather than having doors and cupboards. Try and make it feel like a home. Try and make sure you've got coffee tables and decent quality furniture in there rather than just going for your standard furniture that you put in every single student house. Paint, don't just whitewash everything. We used to actually, in the old days, we used to try and make a lot of houses just whitewashed, and my thought process behind that was if the students were going to leave at the end of the year, it was much easier for them to just wash a wall in white paint, and it would save them on the dilapidations. It would save them on, if we had to paint it, it was just a cheaper issue. I don't think that's really a thing anymore because they scuff so easily, and once you start scuffing things, people live in them differently. If you can have nice, you know, you don't have to have Farrow and Ball paint, but you can take those colours. You can go down your local paint shop and they'll mix you up exactly the same colour, and they'll just give it a warmer tone. They'll make it a much more human place to live. I do think there's a real good market for student HMOs moving forward, but you do have to be really mindful of how you're going to be doing this. There's research I was reading yesterday which is saying that by 2030 we're going to have another 500,000 students. This is in addition to the students we're going to have now. So education doesn't show any signs of dying down. It's just everything's going to be taken a slightly different format, and you've just got to be really thoughtful about how you're going to join the market. Now you go on to the students, and their trends have changed as well. So we used to have quite a set plan for a good 10 years where we'd put the properties on in January, and by April, possibly 60-65% of them had gone to the students who were the most organised. You'd have a bit of a dip off where they all went home for Easter, and then it would slowly pick up again, bring us back round to July and August, where you'd have all the craziness of clearing. You'd have people crying and getting in groups, and you know, eventually we'd sort it all out and then we'd get ready for the next year. That changed last year as well. January, February was pretty busy, and then it started dropping off in March and April, and it didn't come back on the normal platforms. So previously everyone was quite happy using Rightmove and Zoopla as the 2 major portals, and we used to get, I'd probably say about 80% of our leads from those 2 portals. This year it's just changed drastically. I'd probably say we're getting maybe 10% of our leads from Rightmoves and Zoopla, and you're probably finding that the new portals like Unihomes and StuRents and also Facebook as well, these are where we're getting the majority of our student leads. So this is showing that the students are actually early adopters. They're finding these new sites. I mean, I didn't even know they were available last year. This year, they're our major source of income. So the students are finding out about these things, and what's more, they're using them. They're not just knowing about them, they're actually using them. So you have to make sure that your agent is active and all your properties are being seen in the best light on these portals. So it's all showing a move away from the traditional portals and the traditional ways that people are finding properties. So I know here at Eightfold that we've tried to implement our 3D camera walkthroughs. We've tried to make sure that every house has professional photos and floor plans, and the more information that you can give them, they're finding that they can make a much more informed decision as early as possible. Yeah, so another trend that we've seen with the students is perhaps where there's an abundance of student housing and an oversupply, you're seeing a slightly more lackadaisical approach as far as keeping their groups together. So a couple of them might drop out 2 or 3 weeks into the process of getting the contract signed. So what we've noticed is if we're keeping really tight deadlines for the referencing, and it's not to be draconian, it's just to make sure that we're not letting anything slip through the net. So if we're noticing that one of the students isn't answering, isn't communicating, and the guarantor aren't filling in the forms, then we can smell a rat nice and early and maybe nurture these students through a transitional phase where we can bring another person into the group and try and make sure that they're going to get the house that they wanted in the outset. So another trend that I've really noticed is the desire for students to have a bills inclusive tariff, or the option of a bills inclusive tariff. Now, we're at pains to explain when people are taking a bills inclusive tariff, there are cheaper options. For instance, if you do it yourself, you will find that you'll save money. Every bills inclusive option is a service that's being offered to you. And if there's a service, then someone somewhere is making some money off it. So if you want to put the time and effort in, then you can go out and you can do a price comparison search, and you will find cheaper gas, electricity, water is pretty standard, and internet. But if you don't want your liabilities to be linked with your housemates, then you can include a bills inclusive tariff, and that's a good option as well. So we've had quite a lot to talk about today. We've talked about last year's issues, the trends for the landlords for this year, and the trends for the students for this year. So if you've got a HMO in the Brighton area and you're looking to secure the best quality students for the next academic year, give us a call at Eightfold Property and we'll see what we can do. So I'm Dan from Eightfold Property, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.